If you were to go back to the early days of my channel, you would know one of my first goals on the platform was to try to combat the abhorrent Khabib glaze that infested the MMA community like a goddamn parasite. Back when he had first retired, the entire MMA world fell into lunacy. There was this entire mob sweeping through the MMA world who genuinely believed with all their heart and soul that Khabib was the greatest MMA fighter to ever exist. There was real discussion going on between people who are supposed to be well educated on this matter, asking the question, who is greater, Jon Jones or Khabib? And there has never been a darker time in the world of MMA because logic completely flew out the window at that point. It was gone. Okay, it was gone. It was lunacy. People were more logical and level-headed during the Salem witch trials than they are discussing Khabib Nurmagomedov. And you know what it is? You know what it is? It's that whenever you ask the average person, like, oh, what do you think about Khabib? They never ever bring up anything specific about his game. It's always vague generalities. You go to the random MMA fan and you go, oh, what did you think about Khabib? They go, okay, let me get, according to my vague recollection, every takedown he ever shot, he finished. No one could stop him. They all knew what he was going to do, but no one could stop him. He never bled. But from my vague recollection, he was the greatest wrestler the universe has ever seen, and nobody stopped him from doing anything. And it is just this. Okay, they are completely wrong. All right, none of that was true. But for the longest time, it did seem like things were starting to get better. It seemed like, recency bias played a big factor for all the Khabib GOAT discussions. And, as the years went on and life moved on, they just became a little bit more realistic about it, all right? I think at worst you'd hear people say things along the lines of, well, Khabib potentially could have been the GOAT, but, obviously he retired way too early, so you can't really put him in that category. But unfortunately, it is slowly coming back. It is slowly returning. And you know what makes this whole thing way worse? What makes this whole thing way worse is the Khabib glaze is returning, but what is following with it is Charles Oliveira, because for whatever reason, you cannot go 10 minutes on the YouTube platform without seeing, this narrative shift that happened, and it's fucking saying, Charles could have beat Khabib, well, now Khabib would smash him. And you know what? Look, I'm sorry, I'm not going to dance around this. No, I don't think Khabib would smash Charles. In fact, I think Charles has a real shot at beating Khabib. And look, before I even continue, okay, I get it. I understand. When there's photos like this just fucking floating around YouTube, okay, maybe one may think that I'm not a reliable, unbiased source on a matter like this, but look, just give me the opportunity, because I'll hit you with some facts and logic. I will hit you with some facts and logic that prove Khabib is fairly overrated. Khabib is just simply, unequivocally is overrated, and I think Islam Makhachev and Arman Tsaruykyan are way tougher matchups for Charles Oliveira than Khabib ever was. And the lunacy is slowly returning. And trust me, I'll fix it. You just listen. Give it a shot. Give me a chance. The number one vague generality we have to tackle when looking at Khabib Nurmagomedov is the claim that he's a really good wrestler. The claim that he is one of the best wrestlers the sport has ever seen. And just fucking no, he's not. He's not one of the best wrestlers the sport's ever seen. Because what is wrestling? Okay, what is it? What is wrestling? Wrestling is when two people in an open space try to take each other down and put each other flat on their backs. You know what Khabib was not very good at? Taking you down in open space and putting you flat on your back. And I can prove it. You remember when he fought for the title for the very first time against Al Iaquinta? And you remember what happened in that fight? Khabib could not take him down out in the open for literal shit. The first takedown he shoots of that fight out in the open doesn't even get close. Now, I will be fair, the second takedown he shot out in the open, he went for a low single. He did get a hold of Al's ankle, was able to hoist it up, and he did finish that takedown. He finished that singular takedown out in the open, but from there, Al scrambles back up, then they end up against the fence. Okay, now against the fence, that is where Khabib legitimately is one of the best in the world. Against the fence, that's where he was dominant because he comes from a Sambo background, really good judo, really good trips. And the one takedown he hits up against the fence is a high single leg and a trip. That's what he goes for every single time. And there he was very, very good. But Al Iaquinta did one very specific thing that completely rendered Khabib's grappling useless for a majority of that fight. He did one thing. Just not getting backed up. That's it. That was Al's one mission statement, was no matter what happens, I will not be getting backed up. He used a low stance, he stood in the center, and Khabib just could not finish anything. He kept going for that same exact low single leg over and over and over again, and he couldn't hit it. He was going for the exact same takedown over and over again. All Khabib could do was jab and move because he literally could not take him down. Now, when he got him up against the fence, he just kept hitting that singular one takedown over and over again. But from the third round onward, Khabib was never able to get him backed up to the fence, and he had to rely on just pure wrestling out in the open, and it was shown in that matchup to just not be it. I mean, he just didn't have it. And when you look at this one takedown that Khabib always hits up against the fence, a big factor of it is just the fact that, he was a huge lightweight. He cut a ton of weight to make 155. He was very, very physically strong. Now, of course, his foot sweeps are amazing coming from such an extensive judo background, but when you're hiking up somebody's single leg like this, there's no getting around it. Remember when Gilbert Burns fought Khamzat? Now, Gilbert Burns was not a big welterweight, whereas Khamzat couldn't even make 170 probably 95% of the time. Gilbert was helpless to lift Khamzat's leg up. He just couldn't do it. Whereas you look when Kamaru Usman fought Khamzat up at 185, Usman historically had a rock-solid takedown defense. But when Khamzat grabbed a single leg, there was no stopping it. Just hiked it up and then hit a very similar trip that Khabib always does. So it's just an important factor to understand about Khabib's game. Up against the fence because of his judo Sambo background plus his size advantage, he was a monster there, whereas out in the open, it wasn't the same. But look, I get it. Al Iaquinta came from a bit of a wrestling background. He wrestled at a junior college, so maybe that's null and void. Okay, well, what about Conor McGregor? How about every single shot Khabib took on Conor out in the open? What happened? Well, the very first takedown, he had to work really, really hard to get. Conor actually ended up on top briefly, but instead of trying to stay on top, he tried the disengage, which probably was a mistake. Khabib ends up getting this takedown after, a lot of really hard work. From that point onward, Khabib does get him down when he gets him up against the fence. He hits that exact same single leg trip, or he hits a high crotch. But then we come to round 3. And this is the round where Conor really put Khabib on the back foot, tried walking him down, just did not get backed up. And guess what? Conor defended every single shot out in the open. And this is Conor McGregor we're talking about here, a guy who isn't supposed to be a very good wrestler. He never came from any kind of a wrestling background, but weirdly, the greatest wrestler the universe has ever seen, the greatest wrestler to ever step foot in the UFC, could not take Conor McGregor down out in the open. How fucking funny is that? But look, I will be completely fair here. The thing that Khabib was so good at doing was riding you from the top. And look, it's something we've talked about before on this channel. There's a big difference between freestyle and folk style wrestling. Freestyle wrestling is what they do in the Olympics. It's what they do internationally, while folk style is the wrestling we do here in America. And the big difference between the rule set of these two wrestling styles is, in folk style wrestling, there is no referee resets. If you get taken down and you turtle, it's up to you to get back up. The referee will not step in and save you. Whereas in freestyle wrestling, once a takedown occurs, you have 10 seconds to work before the referee stands you back up. And because of this change in rule set, what you see is, in folk style wrestling, guys are elite at pinning and mat returns. While in freestyle wrestling, it's whoever is better at shooting and finishing takedowns. That's who's going to win the fight, because since the referee is going to keep standing you up, that's what the fight comes down to. And when you listen to Daniel Cormier talk about Khabib.
But are you the one who taught Khabib the wrist ride stuff?
So Khabib and them knew how to ride the wrist a little bit. What we did was I was showing him just collegiate wrestling. Ben,
Yeah, folk style, because it's endemic
Yes.
to folk style wrestling.
yes.
That's where it all starts making sense. Khabib was so good at when he got you up against the fence, he would hike that single leg up, look for trips, get you to turtle. And now you trying to stand back up, you're playing Khabib's game now. That is what he was so good at, was constantly using a body lock and just riding you, hitting mat returns, making you work, making you spend a ridiculous amount of energy while he's just controlling you from on top. So where it looks so insanely dominant, and it is dominant, but he's fighting guys who are forced to play this game with him. So what you have to understand when looking at Khabib is what specifically made him good, what he used as a skill set, and that was Sambo and judo up against the fence. And then once he got you down, he used folk style techniques to keep you down and pin you. He doesn't have the same kind of shot as Arman Tsaruykyan, who comes from a freestyle wrestling background. And we will discuss Arman later. So again, and look, obviously I want to be completely honest and completely fair here. There are aspects of Khabib's game that clearly is a fucking problem. You try to turtle and stand back up against him, oh my god, he's gonna maul you up against the fence. But to act like he's the best wrestler the sport's ever seen, I mean, no, he wasn't. He was not good at taking you down out in the open. What he was good at was riding you up against the fence. That's what he did to Dustin Poirier. And, Dustin Poirier kept trying to explode and scramble and get back up, but he was playing Khabib's game, and he got eaten alive. So now we look at Charles Oliveira, and we look at this narrative shift that because he lost to Islam Makhachev and Arman Tsaruykyan, then without a shadow of a doubt, he would have lost to Khabib because, again, vague generality of them two wrestle, Khabib better wrestler, Khabib beats Charles Oliveira. And that logic, again, it's fucking nonsense. Well, let's briefly look at the Islam Makhachev fight, a fight where Khabib was in Islam's corner. Khabib game planned with Islam for Charles, and what were the two big things that they looked at for that fight? And that was, one, no shooting single or double legs. Do not do it because Charles is too dangerous with a guillotine. That was their game plan. Do not shoot takedowns. The only takedowns they would initiate is either throws or trips. They would not risk putting their necks out there to get guillotined. And when you hear people talk about this, why you hear them say things along the lines of, Islam dominated Charles on the ground with wrestling. That is what you hear them say. But during the first exchange on the ground where Charles pulled guard, they were out in the open, Charles definitively, completely won this exchange on the ground. And it's not close. I mean, it's not close at all. And the first thing he does is isolate Islam's right arm. And you see here, he starts turning his hips. He's looking to attack with an armbar. But Islam knows this, so he slips his elbow out. And this kills the armbar opportunity, but Charles keeps his leg over Islam's shoulder. Of course, that's going to make it very difficult to get any ground and pound off, so Islam postures up and he tries to slip his shoulder back inside. But as he's doing this, Charles controls both of Islam's wrists, and this is where Islam makes a pretty big error. If the person on bottom is controlling your wrists, you do not want to lay back on top of them. You want to stay postured up, but Islam doesn't do this. He lays back down on Charles, and because of that, he's able to throw up a triangle. Islam immediately postures up and takes his arm, the one that's inside the triangle, and puts his fist into his chest. So because of this, Charles thinks about going for what's known as a Barato Plata, which is sort of like a Kimura in the sense of that's the kind of pressure it puts on your shoulder. But Islam starts getting his other arm through, so Charles lets go and goes back to full guard. And as he does, he lands a good elbow off his back, which was the most significant strike so far in this sequence. Islam has been landing some real short shots, but nothing significant yet. They kind of stalemate here for a little while until Charles opens up his guard, goes to feet on hips, and now Islam tries to pass his guard. But Charles gets him in half guard, then he takes his right leg and puts in a butterfly hook, which he's using to set up a leg lock entry. He goes underneath, hooks Islam's leg, attacking a leg lock, and Islam gets up
and he runs away.
Who in their right mind looks at that entire exchange and goes, oh yeah, Islam was dominating him with offensive wrestling? I mean, what are you talking about? I mean, no, he wasn't. According to the MMA scoring criteria, if you judge all you were judging was that one sequence right there, Charles was winning. He was the one being offensive. Apart from short ground and pound shots, Islam didn't land anything. But of course, I will be fair and unbiased. Charles does have a problem getting too complacent in guard up against the fence, with his head being pressed into the fence. That is the last place you want to do jiu-jitsu off your back. It's something I've talked about in depth. And from this position, yes, Islam is winning. Islam got the better of this exchange, and that is a problem that Charles has. But why did Islam win this fight? Why was he able to beat Charles? Purely because of the striking, and what it was in particular was Charles was trying to do his patented walk him down, get in his face, pressure him, and what we saw from Islam was the ability to constantly circle away, lunge in with punches, and then get out of range again. Because as we've learned from that fight, Islam is a very technical striker. Far more technical than Khabib ever was. Now, I've always maintained, I do think Khabib's striking is underrated. I think he was dangerous on the feet, but Khabib never had this in and out movement with his striking. Ever. That is just not what he did. When Al Iaquinta was just walking him down, not getting backed up, which completely eliminated any takedown threat, all Khabib could do is jab, whereas Islam Makhachev is catching Alexander Volkanovski in the middle of his combination. He's stepping in and landing combinations on Dustin Poirier. That is not what Khabib did. It just wasn't. They are so different that comparison is literally mute and void. But of course, sure, like I've mentioned so many times on my channel before, you put Charles in this position with his head pressed up against the fence with Khabib on top of him. Yeah, I do not like that for Charles. I don't like that for Charles pretty much against anybody. But how exactly does Khabib get there if Charles walks him down, tries to put pressure on him like he did to Islam? Is Khabib all of a sudden darting in and out of range, landing clean combinations, and then getting out again? No, I mean, that is never what he did. So, I mean, okay, how exactly would Khabib do it? Well, Arman Tsaruykyan was able to shoot double legs on Charles, and he was able to finish it without any threat of the guillotine. How was he able to do that? Well, because he was a better wrestler than Khabib. I mean, it's just that simple. His takedowns, they're a bit quicker. He gets a bit lower. When he hit this double leg right here, it was a beautiful entry, and he got his head practically in Charles's crotch. But when Khabib would shoot doubles like this up against the fence, they were never like this. You were not going to find an example of Khabib shooting a double leg with this head positioning. His head was always in threat of getting guillotined. In fact, that is why when he shot a double leg on Dustin was able to get him in a really tight guillotine. This was a guillotine that he had to really work to get out of. He had to go to his side to relieve the pressure, and he had to really scramble his way out of that guillotine. All right? You can't do that against Charles Oliveira. That is why he and Islam game planned to not shoot that way. They don't have the same ability as somebody like Arman, who comes from a real wrestling background. But even with that all being said, Charles, he still did a fine job defending takedowns out in the open against somebody who is a better pure wrestler than Khabib is. But again, sticking on Arman, people will point again to the fact that Arman did really well from inside of Charles's guard, and they go, okay, well, again, because Arman was able to do it, then clearly Khabib would be completely fine in Charles's guard. Again, so wrong. So wrong. You know who else did really good in Charles's guard? You know who did way better than Islam Makhachev in Charles's guard? Michael Chandler. You know why? Because Michael and Arman are both jacked hamsters. They're super explosive, super compact and bulky, and anybody who's ever played guard in their life know these are the type of guys that it is borderline impossible to get anything off against. Short, explosive, compact guys. Why did Michael Chandler do better in Charles's guard than Islam did? Okay, Charles really threatened Islam, but he couldn't threaten Michael Chandler, because that is why Michael Chandler, Arman Tsaruykyan, they are tougher opponents to have in your guard than Khabib and Islam. But of course, I'm not trying to say that Michael Chandler is better than Khabib from on top. He's not. But when it comes to purely trying to set up offense off of your back, these fucking bulging penis kind of style of grapplers like Michael Chandler, Arman Tsaruykyan, these balls of muscle, they are the hardest to deal with. Like right here, when Charles was controlling Chandler's lead leg, and then he reached his leg all the way through going for a sweep, he could not move Michael Chandler. His entire body was like an erect penis. But again, I'm gonna be completely unbiased. Is my point here today to tell you that Charles would fucking smack Khabib around? No, I'm not trying to say that. I am not trying to say that at all. In fact, look, I think it's a very close fight. I think it's a tough fight. I think you can go back and forth in very specific areas. But this weird narrative, this very weird narrative of, again, what it is, okay, Islam Makhachev, Arman Tsaruykyan, wrestlers. They beat Charles. Khabib wrestle better. Khabib also beat... No, it's stupid. It's stupid, all right? Khabib, he's not going to be able to shoot any single double legs on Charles. He's not. He's going to put himself in way too much risk of getting guillotined. Charles is most likely going to try to do to Khabib exactly what he did to Islam, which is try to walk him down, pressure him, get in his face. Khabib is not going to be darting in and out landing combinations. That has never been what he did. And then, again, the question there is, how does it look on the feet? Khabib and Islam both had really weird yet very effective head movement. It was really difficult to land cleanly on them. So look, like I said, I think you can go back and forth with it a little bit. But the fact of the matter is, on the ground, Charles would have an advantage out in the open. Khabib would have the advantage up against the fence. Arguably the strongest aspect of Khabib's game, which is mat returns and riding you from the body lock against the fence, that just isn't going to happen in this matchup. Charles isn't even going to try to get back up. So it all comes down to how it plays out on the feet and who can keep the fight where they're the best. My only point here today is to tell you that Arman Tsaruykyan and Islam Makhachev, those are tougher stylistic matchups than Khabib is to Charles. And you can't just go full generalities and say, oh, well, if wrestler A beat wrestler B, then this means that Khabib, because he wrestles, is better. No, look, there is huge differentials in grappling styles between all of these guys, and you have to take each one case by case. And you know what? People just don't do that, and I think they're wrong.